It is interesting that even a high-quality and meticulously conducted genetic analysis can become the basis for controversial conclusions, if a competent genealogical and historical study is not carried out. An example would be the following story. People are always interested in the descendants and ancestors of celebrities. And even more so if they are key figures in the history of mankind. Jesus Christ is one of such figures. And, of course, everyone is interested, does he have relatives among those living today? It must be said that there are two possible lines of descendants and relatives of Christ. These are direct descendants, from the supposed marriage of Christ and Mary Magdalene, when Christ showed the first miracle, turning water into wine, or the miracle in Cana of Galilee. This version is not recognized by the Church. But there is a theory that the kings of the Franks from the Merovingian dynasty are direct descendants of Christ and Mary Magdalene. Next come the descendants from the first marriage of Jesus' father, Joseph. After all, the earthly husband of the Mother of God was married twice. And the widower Joseph had children from his first family. The official Church cautiously acknowledges these non-blood relatives. There is also a version that Christ was not the only one, but the first of several children of Mary. But we will not consider this version here, as it contradicts the Bible. Mary was a virgin, and Joseph was her guardian on earth. Having become a widower, he took Mary as his wife and did not know her, as the Gospel of Matthew indicates. Various researchers believe that Joseph the carpenter had 6 children from his first marriage, 4 sons and 2 daughters. These brothers of Christ are mentioned in the Gospel of Mark. Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, Joses, Judas and Simon? The historian Eusebius of Caesarea, but not the official Church, names the sisters, Mary and Salome. But what role they played in the early Christian community is unknown. According to a number of apocrypha, that is, stories about Christ and the apostles not officially recognized by the Church, their sons at some time claimed leadership among the Christians living in Judea. According to medieval historians, the descendants of Cleopas, the brother of Joseph the carpenter, were the Georgian kings from the Bagratian family. In general, it would seem that at least by now there should be no fewer relatives of Christ than relatives of the Prophet Muhammad, and they number about 40 million. But their identification runs into 2 problems. First, can Joseph's descendants in the male line be considered genetic relatives of Christ, since Joseph did not participate in his conception, and, therefore, could not pass on the Y chromosome? And, if Christ did have blood brothers and sisters, then they can only be traced through the female line, that is, through mitochondrial analysis? But there are no mentions in history of Christ's female descendants, that is, his mother's children. Then who should we take genetic tests from? From all the people living in the Middle East? But that's unrealistic. And the second problem, completely practical, where to get Christ's genetic material? And here the Turin shroud appears in our story. It is currently kept in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin. According to legend, the Son of God was wrapped in this shroud after the crucifixion. And thanks to this, traces of blood remained on it, which can be examined with the help of modern computers. The first mention of it dates back to 1349, supposedly it was brought from Constantinople by the Crusaders, after the Fourth Crusade. And this shroud began to be called the Turin shroud after 1578, when it was brought to Turin, the capital of the Savoy Kingdom. Several times the Church allowed different laboratories to take pieces of the fabric for analysis. But scientists have not come to a clear opinion on the dating of the shroud. The earliest possible date of the threads is the 7th century AD, the latest is the 14th century. But recently it was finally given the desired age of 2,000 years. In 2015, scientists from the University of Padua tried to find genetic relatives of Christ based on biomaterial taken from the Turin shroud. Among all the human mitochondrial haplotypes found on the fabric, most belong to an ethnic group that is still very rare in Western Europe, the head of the study, Gianni Barcaccia, told reporters. According to him, the blood samples on the shroud belong to the fourth group, the rarest on earth and found mainly in the Middle East. Based on the data we received, we assume that we are talking about the Druze, a closed ethno-confessional group living in a number of areas in the south of Syria and Lebanon, as well as in the north of Israel, the scientist said. But this conclusion can hardly be called unambiguous and final. Because there are many questions left. Because the Druze is not the name of an ancient people, but the name of a religion, that is, a branch of Ismaili Shurism, and this is a direction of Islam, very far from orthodox, named after the preacher Daratzi, in the 11th century. Therefore, it is unknown, were these people who lived in this place since the time of Christ? Or is it just an association of like-minded co-religionists from different tribes who settled there? And the Virgin Marnia came from the famous Jewish family of kings. And the location of this family is generally known. And the Druze are not descendants of this family. But perhaps the descendants of those Jews who were the husbands of Jesus' supposed half-sisters? But it is impossible to determine. And most scientists believe that the Shroud of Turin was woven in the 14th century. But even if it was woven in the 7th century, it is clear that the blood remaining on it belongs to a person from that period of history. And he could have been a relative of one of the future or already existing Druze in the 14th century. Then everything is correct. But it is unlikely that these are relatives of Christ. There is no clear answer here. And it is unlikely that one will be expected. So it is unlikely that anyone will be able to register themselves as genetic relatives of Christ. But all people who have accepted Jesus in their hearts are his relatives.